have you guys ever done an investigation where there has been Satan worship?
Yes. So we're doing our investigation, and we go into this grandson's bedroom, and there is propaganda. There is Satanist propaganda, white supremacist propaganda. This kid was into some nasty stuff. Later that night, things started happening. We started getting the knocking and banging in sequence of 3, and we were in the living room, and all of our meters started going off, and the entire living room filled up with the rotting stench.
Welcome to the Mugshot Podcast. I'm joined today with Clarissa Vazquez. She is a paranormal investigator. I have an introduction that I'd very much like to get her. But first of all, Clarissa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Good deal. All right. So, Clarissa, you are a Colorado native and an avid paranormal investigator. After serving in the U.S. Air Force, thank you for your service, by the way, and having her first paranormal experience while enlisted, Clarissa returned to Colorado and later founded the Colorado Coalition of Paranormal Investigators, CCPI, in 2004. As a world-renowned writer, Clarissa is the author of, we have a few titles here, Ghost of the Heart, A Paranormal Investigator's Journey in 2011, Ghost Hunting in Colorado, Theories for Worldwide Investigators, 2011, No Monsters Here in 2014, Demons of the Coven in 2014, Phantom Trains and Haunted Rails of the U.S., Debunking Common Paranormal Myths, Exploring Psychosomatic... How do you say that word? What is it?
Pareidolia.
Pareidolia. What is that?
Pareidolia is the brain's innate ability to make conclusions out of incomplete data. The best way to describe it is when you're looking up in the sky and you see a cloud formation that you interpret to be a bunny rabbit. Obviously, there is no bunny rabbit in the sky, but your brain finds familiarity in that pattern.
Is that right? So it just kind of links the two together.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Clarissa's creepy culinary classics. Are you a chef as well? Quite the cook?
I'm quite the foodie. Yeah.
Yeah. Outstanding. Okay. I Can Bait My Own Hook, True Tales of a Fisher Mom.
Mm-hmm.
And that, it says it was penned as C.J. Hoyt.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
so
that was a nom de plume that I used, but
fair enough. And then lastly, the Phantom Hitchhiker Project and America's Haunted Roadways in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to her own literary works, Clarissa has also been featured in several other books pertaining to ghosts and to the paranormal, to include Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film by Christopher Balzano, Ghosts from Coast to Coast by Kalyomi, hope I pronounced that right, and Ghosts of Colorado by Dennis Baker. She's been on several paranormal radio programs to include Coast to Coast AM. And how was that, Coast to Coast? I've listened to it a few times.
Yeah, it was fun.
It was fun? All right. Spooky South Coast with Tim Weisberg, and Darkness on the Edge of Town with David Schrader. Clarissa takes a very scientific approach to her research and created the popular Phantom Hitchhiker Project in response to some very big names in the paranormal research community saying paranormal investigation, more specifically ghost hunting, cannot be conducted scientifically due to the fact that experiments are not conducted in a lab and there are too many variables. In her stubborn, red-headed nature and can-do attitude that sets her apart from others in the paranormal research community and makes her a true pioneer in the field. I very much like that intro. You have a very impressive background. And so I was really happy that we could get a lot of this information out there. So if we can, I'd like to start at the beginning. In your intro right here, obviously it says you were in the Air Force, and that's where you had your first paranormal experience. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So many, many moons ago, it's actually been a couple of decades now. I was uh, a very low-ranking service member on a very tall totem pole, and the duty station where I was in the process of converting their former morgue in their hospital into a physical therapy department. And
Oh,
being a very, very low ranking person on a very tall totem pole, one of the duties that I was personally tasked with was helping to clean up some of that construction debris. So I'm down there sweeping up, brick dust and asbestos and all kinds of, it was the 90s, so PPE wasn't as stringent as it is now.
sure.
Um, and I came back from uh, lunch in the civilian world and saw a man in this gutted area. Um, he was very tangible, just as
Okay.
tangible as you and I. He was not transparent. He was not wispy. He was not floating. But he looked out of place. He was wearing the olive drab fatigues like you would have seen in the 60s, 70s, early 80s, as opposed to the green camouflage battle dress uniform that we wore back then.
Okay.
And he was clean cut, rugged, very handsome.
Hmm.
And I got within about 10 feet of him, and I said, "Excuse me, sir, is there something I can help you with?" And he looked at me and looked away and walked through a cinder block wall and disappeared.
Really?
And that cinder block wall was an exterior wall. It was a foundational wall. So it wasn't like he could have gone around a corner or anything. I mean, he walked through this exterior wall and just poof, vanished. Uh,
Wow.
and it didn't occur to me at the time to be frightened. I'm just kind of standing there going, you know, called my mom that night. I'm like, "You're not gonna believe what happened." And she says, "Well, are you gonna go back tomorrow and try to see him?" So yeah, of course I am. So
Yeah.
I never did see him again. But paranormal TV was not a thing then. The
Sure.
internet was still in its infancy. And so I did what any curious person would do. I went off base and got a library card and started reading every book I could get my hands on. I'm reading books by Hans Holzer and by Ed Warren, and learned about analog tape recorders and Polaroid cameras, and learned about EVP and things like that. And that's what started this whole miraculous journey.
So you see this guy,
Mhm.
um, and what happens over the following like days and weeks? How do you process what you saw? I mean, was a lot of second guessing? Were you thinking, man, there is no way I saw what I saw? Were you trying to just piece it together?
Yeah, I did. I spent probably 2 days going, how did it happen? And
Yeah.
I examined the room. I'm like, is it possible that there was a door or a window? I just wasn't paying attention. But that wall, again, it was a cinder block wall. It was solid, floor to ceiling.
Okay.
And no doors, no corners. Again, it was an exterior perimeter wall that this man just went through and
Yeah.
vanished. And it left me more curious and more perplexed than anything.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can imagine. I think that anyone that is an experiencer, they have that moment where they're like, okay, there's got to be a rational explanation.
Mhm.
And then when you try your hardest to debunk it and you can't find any rational explanation, it's amazing how it's like, well, maybe that did actually happen.
Right.
Um, but obviously, I mean, so you found a passion for it immediately. You decided this happened. I am dead set that this happened. And here we are in 2024. And now you are, I would say, one of the leading investigators in Colorado. So obviously that changed you.
It did. And I've spent more than half my life now dedicated to this field of research, working on uh, how to incorporate the scientific method into investigating, working on obtaining and presenting credible data, to the world.
Hmm.
And, what I present, I don't call it evidence. Evidence is something you can prove in court. I call it data because I collect information and use that information to piece together what could potentially be paranormal phenomena.
Okay. Well, and that is amazing. So when it comes to, I have a lot of questions for you when it comes to your method,
Mhm.
um, because I think that you brought up like the media, and we have these TV shows. And I got to tell you, I was watching an episode, just kind of get myself in the mindset today of Ghost Adventures. That's one of the more popular one.
Mhm.
And I'm watching this, and I'm like, okay, there is nothing happening on this episode. It was all drama, you know what I mean? Oh my God, something
Mhm.
grabbed me right there, and there wasn't anything that could be proof. But
Right.
now, with your organization, if I understand it correctly, first of all, it doesn't seem like you are doing any sort of recording that is released to the public. It's very confidential to the homeowner, and so you're just doing it to help figure out what they're experiencing. Did I get that right?
That's correct. We've got a very strict confidentiality policy that we adhere to. Um, Despite all of the good that the paranormal TV shows have brought to the world in terms of helping remove the stigma attached to discussing having had a paranormal experience.
Mhm.
20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, it was very taboo
Yeah.
to discuss having had an encounter like that. And some people, if you ask them, they'll say, "Oh no, paranormal activity is on the rise. Look at how much people are experiencing." I don't think it's on the rise. I just think more people are more comfortable talking about it
Sure.
because that stigma has been removed. Um, However, because there is still a little bit of a stigma attached to it, the last thing we want is some water cooler conversation, going, hey, I saw Dave's house on this ghost hunter's website. I saw Dave's kitchen. There's a picture of his family, in the living room. So we do have a very strict client confidentiality policy. Public locations with permission from the location owner will discuss on social media and sometimes even broadcast live from that location if the location owner or management gives us permission in writing to do so.
That's awesome. I bet that's a lot of fun when you
Mhm.
can do one of those and you can kind of share it with the world like that.
Mhm.
So, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you has to do with paranormal activity itself.
Mhm.
Uh, because I mean, you talk about data points, and so I think you're better informed than the average citizen that maybe just experienced something they're not quite sure what it was. But at the
Right.
end of the day, I don't think um, definitively there's a way to say exactly what one thing is from something else. I mean, maybe they're different phenomenon, and maybe you would care to elaborate. But I mean, what do you believe is like the root cause of paranormal activity? Are we talking about ghosts? Are we talking about demons? Are we talking about um, uh, other dimensions? I know that I've heard people say, maybe at Skinwalker Ranch, great example. They talk about the universes are rubbing together there, and things might happen. And what is a normal person supposed to believe? I mean, what do you think this activity actually is?
Well, it depends a lot on the activity.
Okay,
Um, you know, uh, and 99% of the time, what we're able to do is we're able to debunk what the client is experiencing. And that's where we can definitively say, the shadow that you're seeing walking down your hallway is not the result of a spectral entity or something paranormal. It's actually when the wind kicks up and blows, this tree branch in your bathroom that, is illuminated by the porch light from your neighbor.
mm,
And I've actually done that. I've climbed a tree in January, and triggered the neighbor's porch light, and shook this tree branch to replicate the shadow that the client, sees going down their hallway. Um,
huh, okay.
and, uh, so in that aspect, we're able to provide peace of mind to our clients on two different levels. Number one, we go in letting the client know, hey, we believe you. We believe you are experiencing something. Now, what
Sure.
that something is, that's our job to discern.
I
Uh,
got you.
Now, if we do uncover data that is indicative of paranormal activity, that's icing on the cake for us. But again, most of the time we're able to go in and debunk what they're experiencing, which gives them peace of mind. It They are able to resume feeling comfortable in their personal space, whether it's their home or their workplace or their church. They're able to go back to feeling comfortable in the places where they should feel the safest, um, because we've debunked, what they're experiencing.
Okay. And so the other half of that coin, though, is when you do have the evidence,
Mhm.
what is the next step? If you believe that you have evidence of something, whatever it is there, I mean, how do you handle that?
So it depends on a few factors. It depends on the client.
Okay.
If we are able to um, ascertain that what is going on and what they're experiencing is potentially paranormal in nature, you know, do they want to get rid of it? Do they want to try to peacefully coexist with this? Um, do we interpret what they're experiencing to be malicious or malevolent or demonic? In which case, then we've got to call in, clergy or other experts, to come in and do that energy work or that, or the exorcism rite or what have you. Um,
Okay.
9 times out of 10, if we don't believe that it's malevolent in nature, if we don't believe that it's harmful, we can equip the client with tools, to establish the boundaries and say, this is my space. You can visit during the daytime. You cannot join me in the bathroom. You cannot frighten my children. And, sometimes that's effective.
Sure.
Oh, if they're interested in peacefully coexisting, we've got some clients, they're like, oh yeah, we want to keep it. Now that we know what it is, they can share the house with us. We don't mind. It's a great conversation starter. Yeah, we have a ghost. And here's the EVP that the investigation team captured of the ghost talking to us. Things like that. So again, there's so many different variables when it comes to it. Is it nice? Is it does the client want to keep it? And when the answer is no, no, it's not nice, or no, the client doesn't want to try to peacefully coexist, then we have to utilize other resources to come in and handle the situation.
Has there ever been an investigation that you've done where you've come away with the conclusion, the definitive conclusion, not just that it is some sort of entity, but you believe you've identified it? So we know this is John Doe that used to live in the house before. Has there ever been a time where you're like, this is what it is?
We have a couple of times.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, we investigated several years ago. There's a town here in Colorado, and you may have heard of it, Chris. It's called Redstone, Colorado, and the
Okay.
Redstone Castle is located there. And it was constructed by a man. His last name was Osgood, and prior to the castle being built, he constructed this 3-story mansion in Redstone for him and his wife to live in while the castle was being built.
Oh, okay.
And we had access to this mansion. And we knew that Osgood was German.
Hmm.
And there were 2 of us on the team that spoke German at the time, myself and another investigator. And so we're it we're in 2 completely different areas of the house, and it wasn't orchestrated, it wasn't planned. Our tech center is actually who caught it. Um, and myself and this other investigator, we were actually conducting an EVP session, both of us at the same time in German, and we were asking a lot of the same questions, not necessarily in sync, or simultaneously, but we were asking the same questions in German, which we found a little interesting. But as we were doing that, I was on the main floor with 2 brand new rookie investigators. Uh, and we're sitting on this sofa. I had one on either side of me. And we're conducting this EVP session. And this man walks into the room and sits down on the love seat opposite of us. And of course, the two rookie investigators, this was either their first or second investigation working with me, and they both have a death grip on my arms. And I'm like,
Really?
come on, let go, and so I start talking to him. I'm speaking to him in English, hello, my name is Clarissa. These are my friends. What is your name? Is this your home? Can you tell me what year it is? And he wouldn't speak to us. And he wouldn't make eye contact. He just sat opposite of us and just kind of stared off, really. And so I called on the radio for the other team to come upstairs. Okay, you need to see this. And of course, the team comes upstairs, and another rookie investigator who was with that other team, they walk in the room and he flips on the light. And
Oh,
poof, the man is gone. But what we did, I told the two women that were with me, I said, do not say a word about what you saw. And, each of us, we all went in, I went into the dining room. Another one went and sat in the foyer. And the third one told the other team what she witnessed. And then the second one went and independently told that team what she witnessed. And then I came in and told that team what I witnessed. And all three of our stories lined up. And then later we were presented with a photograph of Mr. Osgood. And all three of us went, that's who we saw.
no kidding. So it was very, very clear when he
Yes.
sat down, you could make out who he was.
Yes. We were able to make out who he was, and down to, his facial features, his mannerisms, his posture, and, what he looked like. And, we all described exactly the same thing. And then, we saw a photograph of him and we all went, that's who we saw.
Wow. That is amazing. I mean, when you see something like that, I know it's almost like I can only imagine that you guys go to so many. Like you said, 99% of these, or, an approximation, are debunked. So when you get that one, I mean, it's got to feel like you just hit the jackpot, especially something like that.
Yeah, a full-bodied apparition in this field is considered to be the Holy Grail.
No kidding.
Mhm.
Well, so let me ask you this. So, by the way, I put out to my fan base, I said if they had any questions for my guest, I put your bio out there and I got some questions back.
Sure.
I'd like to ask one of the questions that they sent me. And so this one is going to be from Michaela S. And she said, what is the most compelling piece of evidence you have gotten while investigating?
Great question, Michaela. EVPs are great pieces of data that we can get. We worked a case in 2017 where a family was, and it was a young family. They had an infant. I think he was 8 weeks old, I think, at the time. And when the infant was born, the activity intensified. And so we were really struggling trying to bring this family some peace and really struggling to debunk what they were experiencing. And we obtained an EVP. We actually got it on a GoPro. It wasn't captured on any of our audio recorders. It was captured on a GoPro. And it was this child crying out to their mother going, I don't want to die, mommy. And come to find out, with a little bit of research, the next street over, a child had been murdered a few years prior.
Really?
Yeah.
So is it I guess when I or others think of like paranormal activity, for some reason, I'm always under the impression that it's like limited. Maybe it's because I watched Beetlejuice when I was a kid and it just stuck with me. But it's like, you're in the house, you're staying in the house. But it sounds like that's not the case. So it can come and go as it please and kind of.
Yeah, I think it can. I think in some cases, perhaps they are stuck. because they're not consciously aware, um,
Mm.
or they're only aware of the walls that surround them, or perhaps they're attached to a tangible object within that structure. Um, but for the most part, I think they can come and go. We hear stories all the time uh, of a particular spirit, that will move with a family.
Really?
The family will move away and their ghost goes with them. So yeah, I think some of them can and do. And then there are others who only make themselves known on anniversaries or important dates or celebrations, things of that nature.
That's so interesting.
Mhm.
Any like patterns that you found, or it's just completely, I mean, they know what they're doing, but there's really no way to decipher it.
Yeah, sometimes there's a pattern, sometimes there isn't. There's the story of the ruins, the Borley Rectory ruins in England, where the spirit comes, transcends the staircase on a certain anniversary. There are a couple of cemeteries. One of them is in Central City, Colorado,
Really?
where a bouquet of yellow roses appears on a grave in the snow with no footprints on the same date every year. Uh, you know,
What is the date?
it's in April, and I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the date was. I know it's in April, and a lot of investigators have gone up there, and watch, and then the sun comes up, and here's this bouquet of yellow roses right next to the grave, and there's no footprints in the snow to indicate that somebody with a physical body placed them there. Um,
Really? And
yeah,
how old was the grave or the graveyard? Has it been there a while, or is it
it,
more?
it's been there a while. Obviously Central City is an old mining town,
Sure.
and the story behind the grave is there was um, a man who was in one of the saloons and shot during a scuttle, and the belief is the lore behind it is that the roses are from his girlfriend, his lover, his mistress, his fiance, or whomever, that mourned him forever and ever and ever.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there are some that are active on only on anniversaries, and then there's my late husband who's been gone 8 months and just makes himself known whenever he wants to. So
No kidding. So
yeah.
you experience at your house fairly regularly as well.
Yes, I don't get to personally experience him yet. He messes with our cats.
Oh, is
Uh,
that right?
yeah, he was notorious for sneaking up. I've got three beautiful cats, and he was notorious for sneaking up on them and goosing them and making them jump.
Uh,
And every now and then, one of them they'll be walking across the living room or laying in the bed with me, and all of a sudden, they jump up. It's like, oh, Daddy's here. Okay. Yeah.
that's so interesting.
Mhm.
Well, that I mean, something like that, does that bring you a level of comfort to know that he's still around? I mean, how do you feel
Yeah.
about that?
Well, my husband was an investigator also.
Really?
And
Okay.
yeah, yeah, he was one of the best investigators I ever had the pleasure of working with. And critics will say it was because I trained him, and I did. But some of the skills and the temperament that he had, you're born with. It can't be taught.
Sure.
So to know that he's still here, and the only way right now that he can make his presence known is to mess with the boys. Okay, I wish he'd, write in the steam on the mirror or goose me or something. But it does bring me a certain level of comfort to know that he's doing what he can to let me know that he's still here.
Amazing. And so, I mean, obviously, you being an experiencer, there's no belief is needed at this point.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
you have seen it so much. Um, so when it comes to the afterlife, I mean, what does that look like to you? I mean, does it again, you are you happy that you know that there's something after it, or um,
Yeah. I am. It does bring a certain level of peace. to know that there is something beyond this world. As a Christian, I obviously believe in heaven and hell, and um, you know, but we still don't know exactly what it is, that lies beyond, the conscious realm of the living. Uh, there are theories about, purgatory, that perhaps the ghosts that we're encountering are the spirits that are in purgatory and that are awaiting judgment. There's, the reincarnation theory that, that who we're encountering are those that have crossed over, but they're waiting to reincarnate. Um,
Yeah.
or they're stuck, or they have unfinished business, or they're afraid of judgment. So there's still a lot that we don't know yet. But
Sure.
there are several, like myself, that work pretty tirelessly trying to um, figure out those answers and try to find um, something concrete, that we can at least start building on toward gaining that information.
So, do you find that what you know and what you experience, does it ever clash with religion at all? And the reason I ask before you answer, I don't know if you're familiar with the Sean Ryan podcast or the
Yeah.
Sean Ryan show, but he had an exorcist on, a prestigious exorcist within the Catholic Church on at one point. This was a few months back. And he was asking him, he's talking about, you have a possession and this is how he handles it. And this is the things that he's seen and they do. And so the question was asked if, he sees different activity with ghosts and demons. And this particular priest, he was dead set. He said, no, they're all demons. They are not, they mimic what you would expect from a ghost, and they deceive people into thinking they're ghosts. But in reality, every single one of them is a demon. What is your response to something like that?
I could see how a priest would say that. And I could see how a priest would believe that.
Okay.
Um, however, when we've got um, data that kind of points otherwise, um, and demonic entities have very specific and certain criteria. There is usually an odor that accompanies them. There are behavior patterns that accompany them. And yes, absolutely, demonic entities will try to trick you and will try to deceive you. And they're nasty. It's not something you ever want to mess with or even encounter. And unfortunately, I've had the misfortune of encountering more than one, and it's
Really?
not fun at all.
Okay.
And but yeah, I can see how a priest would believe that. I think if that priest were um, engaged with things other than exorcisms, um, and engaged with activities more geared toward uncovering the truth as opposed to fighting battles in the name of God, then he might have a little more open mind. Uh,
I see what you're saying. So essentially, uh, when you go to work every day in his profession, it's demon, demon, demon. That's exactly what he's going to. You
yeah,
stop seeing that maybe there's this other aspect of it because all you ever encounter are
right,
demons.
right.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, and so that actually brings us to another fan question that I was hoping to ask you. And it relates to bias, because I think that would be a type of bias where that's all you see. And
Mhm.
so this question comes from Brenton B. And he says, how do you prevent outside interference and ensure you're not jumping to conclusions based on biases or preconceived ideas?
That is a fantastic question, Brenton. And that is something that we actually train on. In certain cases, um, I go, in certain cases, I will go into the investigation blind. I will tell my team, I don't want to know what, I don't want to know where, I don't want to know the history. Um, and we did the, in Gardner, Massachusetts, the, oh my gosh. I'm sorry, my phone is. I
No,
don't know
that's
why
okay.
my phone is going meep meep meep. I don't know why it's.
Uh, there you go.
Maybe it's my husband messing with my phone. Um, but there's a famous mansion in Gardner, Massachusetts, and the name of it escapes me. And we investigated it a few years ago. We were guests from a team out of Massachusetts, and they said, come out here, investigate this with us. And so we did. And I said, I want to go in blind. I don't want to know the history of it. I don't want to know I don't want to know how many. I don't want to know their gender. I don't want to know what rooms they're believed to occupy. I want to go in blind. And so a lot of times um, you get a more thorough investigation. You get an unbiased investigation. And whereas, if you're dealing with a client, the client, you're going to do your walkthrough with the client, and the client's going to go, well, this happens here, and this happens here, and this happens at this time of night. And we see this woman on our staircase. And so that's what you look for.
Sure.
And that's another reason why we do not utilize psychic mediums or intuitives or clairvoyance or clairaudience or clairsentience on investigations, because then you've got this person who may or may not be interpreting spirit activity, and they're pointing to you. They're going, oh, I'm sensing a bride over here in this corner. And so then you're hyper focused on this corner, trying to make contact with this bride, when in fact you've got a grumpy old drunk down in the basement, whom you were ignoring, so you're not providing a thorough investigation when you go in with preconceived notions, and when you go in with an overabundance of information going in. So, a lot of times I like to go in blind. Some of my team members, obviously, the case manager who does the intake interview, or the technical manager who will talk to the client and say, okay, what rooms should we focus our cameras in? Things like that. But, the less information you have going in, the more thorough your investigation is going to be, the more credible your data is going to be.
That's amazing. That's really smart. Absolutely. So when it comes to a lot of the investigations that you've had, I know we talked a little bit before about like the type of entity it is.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been on an investigation where it just defied explanation? You have no clue what it was, but it was something you're like, I have no idea.
Yes, I have. And it's always it, and I will tell the same story that I tell when people ask me, have you ever been scared on an investigation? And the short
That's
answer
so
is
funny. That's one of the fan questions. You're gonna do a double here. Go ahead.
okay. So the short answer is no. I've been doing this for so long, I'm pretty desensitized to it.
Sure.
However, we investigated, I think it was in 2010, we investigated a farmhouse in Nucla, Colorado. And it was a 2-story farmhouse with a 3rd-story attic. And the farmhouse had electricity, but it didn't have heat. And the owners had a terrible time keeping it rented. People would come in, they'd pay their first month's rent, their deposit, and before the first month was up, they're like, keep the money, we're out.
Really?
Yeah. And that went on for several years, and they couldn't keep it rented. And so they called us in, and they said, feel free to light a fire in the wood burning stove. And so we went to do that and open the stove, and there's a bunch of dead birds in the stove. They had made a nest in the stovepipe. We ended up having to knock the nest and knock more birds out of the stovepipe. It was gross. It was terrible. Yeah, but we got the fire going, and this is in May in Colorado. So it's chilly at night.
Mm-hmm.
And all of my investigators, there was 2, 4, 6, 8 of us that night in this enormous farmhouse. And all of my investigators were having personal experiences that were tailored to their threshold. So if an investigator was unnerved by seeing something, they were seeing something. If they were unnerved by hearing something, they were hearing something. If they were unnerved by being touched, they were being touched. And again, because I'm desensitized to this, I'm not having any experiences. And I'm going, this is a bummer.
Sure.
'Cause I'm just doing my thing. And myself and two other investigators were up in the attic space. In this attic area, there was a spot that had been converted into a bedroom, and then another spot that was used for storage. So we're in the bedroom space of this attic, and I'm looking through the doorway into the storage area with a night owl monocular. So I've got night vision. It didn't record, it just enabled me to see in the dark. And I'm looking around and I see what I think is a dead bird on the floor. And you can hear me on the audio recorder going, ew, what is that?
Okay.
And then and I'm pretty far away from the audio recorder, so it's almost a whisper, me going, ew, what is that? And then I say, hey, is there a dead bird in there? And you hear the other two investigators that were closer to the recorder going, oh no, I don't know where. And, shine the flashlight on it. And come to find out, it wasn't a dead bird. It was a piece of black garbage bag that had been crumpled up on the floor. And in the dark with night vision, it looked like a dead bird.
Yeah.
So fast forward to data analysis or data review or, whatever you want to call it. I'm going back over this audio footage. And I'm remembering, being in the room and the conversations that I'm having with the other investigators. And then you hear me go, ew, what is that? And this voice goes, dead bird. And you hear me go, is there a dead bird in there? Oh no, I don't know where. And that's when I had my personal experience. It was like, oh crap, it was in my head. It either knew that I thought I was seeing a dead bird, or it
Sure.
was making me think I was seeing a dead bird.
No
But
kidding.
yeah, but whatever it was, knew that I was interpreting that pareidolia, that I was interpreting that as a dead bird.
Wow.
And so it's like, and so that was my creep factor. And so we have not to this day been able to pinpoint exactly who or what that was, because everybody's personal experience was custom tailored to their threshold. And in order to get to me, it had to get in my brain. And it's scary enough with just me in there.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
uh, so, having had that experience, that's really the only time I've ever been, straight legit scared. Oh, it was in my head.
Well,
And
so let me ask you a question on that.
Mhm.
Because that does have to be terrifying for everyone. I mean, if whatever you're scared of, it happens to you. I mean, that is, that's going to shock the whole team, and then everyone's probably going to get a little bit scared. But now, I guess the question is, as an investigator myself, a former police officer, one of the things that I would ask is, okay, well, everyone's experience is different. How do you differentiate between an actual paranormal experience and maybe some sort of hallucination or mental illness? Not that you guys have mental illness, but I mean, how do you, since everything was so vastly different, I mean, could there be an environmental factor, maybe something that was in the house causing people to just experience what was on their mind at the time?
well, and that actually occurred to me. It's like, was there maybe carbon monoxide in
Yeah.
there? Or, we did have some pretty elevated electromagnetic fields that night. It's like, so were people having sensitivity to EMF, causing them to feel like they're seeing things or hear things or feel like they're being touched or whatever. Um, but it wasn't until I had my experience outside of that location. I'm going back and reviewing our, from the audio recorder. I'm not on location anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so in essence, it kind of validated, what everybody else was going through. Were we able to pinpoint who or what that was? No, we weren't.
Yeah.
It's not something that you hear about from other investigation organizations. It's not something that we've encountered since, where everyone has an experience that is custom tailored to their threshold. Um,
Sure.
and, was it one entity or was it multiple? We don't know.
That's crazy. Yeah, that does defy explanation.
Mhm.
Um, so when you're around this type of, you go to a house, it has, you're investigating paranormal activity.
Mhm.
I have heard, and I would just be curious your take, uh, that some people will internalize the energy and maybe it manifests in different ways. They get happy, they get sad, they get angry, they get sick. Have you experienced anything like that?
Me personally, no.
Okay.
But there are people, that, like I mentioned a minute ago, there are people that have a sensitivity to the electromagnetic field. So, when you're in a structure that has elevated levels of EMF, whether they've got, really old appliances or um, a high voltage lines running nearby, they're going to, they're going to feel sick or lightheaded. Um, if they've got that sensitivity. And, science has proven that prolonged exposure to high levels of EMF can be pretty hazardous to your health. That's why it's now illegal to have high voltage power lines over city parks, because um, the kids that were playing in those parks were exposed to those high levels for so long that they started developing tumors and different types of cancer. Uh,
Oh, okay.
yeah. And so, it can lead to feelings of being watched and paranoia and, hallucinations and things of that nature. So, there's that. Um, but again, every investigation is different. Every situation is different. And you have to go in treating each location and each client as if it is the real deal. You can't just dismiss somebody and say, oh, this guy's schizophrenic. He's not
Sure.
experiencing anything ghostly. Well, yeah, he may suffer from schizophrenia, but he may also have a ghost in his house.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a great point.
and we do ask clients, is anyone being treated for mental illness? We don't ask specifics, but we do ask, is anyone being treated for mental illness? Um, and, has, during the time of the paranormal encounter, was anyone under the influence of alcohol, marijuana, or another substance, including prescription medications? We ask those questions, and we
Sure.
don't want to know the specifics, obviously because of HIPAA, but we need to know, are there outside factors that could be contributing to what the client is potentially experiencing?
Sure. So let me ask you a question about the process of the investigation. So let's just say hypothetically, there's a person out there, they have what they believe to be paranormal activity,
Mhm.
and they want someone to research it, and so they reach out to you. And by the way, what is your website?
The Colorado Coalition of Paranormal Investigators website is www.coloparanormal.com.
Awesome. So anyone out there, I know a lot of our viewers are from Colorado. If you are on the western side of Colorado, um, reach out and they can contact you through the website, if I'm not mistaken. But let's say they go and they fill out that contact form. So what is the process from start to finish to where you receive it and then you go and investigate in the conclusion?
So we receive the official request for services, and we will not touch a case. We will not contact a client until we receive that official request for services. We have people reaching out to us on Facebook and through email all the time, and we always direct them to the website. You have to fill out that form and officially in writing request our services. Um, and then our case manager reaches out, does an intake interview, either in person or over the phone, depending on their location. And then once we have a uh, date scheduled, then our historian goes to work and starts looking at the property, and the not just the real estate aspect of it, but they're looking at the geographic aspect of it. What is the geological composition of the ground that structure sits on? They're also looking for newspaper archives, not just at that address, but at surrounding addresses. Because, like I mentioned, from the 2017 investigation, we did find out that, that a homicide had taken place one street over from the house that we were investigating when we obtained that "I don't want to die" EVP.
Sure.
So, we've got information going in, and then we go. Our technical manager meets with the client, and and ascertains where we're going to set up our static cameras or our DVR cameras. We determine where we're going to set up our technical center or our nerve center or home base or whatever you want to call it. We call it the tech center. And then we, depending on the size of the location, determines how many investigators are present. If it's a really small location, there's going to be 3 to 4 of us. If it's a larger location, there will be more of us. And so we go in, we conduct the investigation. Sometimes sometimes we're in and out in 5 hours. Sometimes it takes a couple of nights. It depends on client availability and what we obtain as far as data goes. We go back. And one thing a lot of people need to understand and remember, what they see on television looks really easy.
Mhm.
The setup and tear down of the equipment alone can take an hour or more, depending on the size of the location and how many pieces that we
Sure.
use. And then for every piece of equipment we utilize, for every camera, for every audio recorder, let's just say we have a 5-hour investigation and we utilize 5 DVR cameras and 5 audio recorders. We'll just stick with 5s.
Okay.
So we've already spent 5 hours investigating, but we use 5 DVR cameras. So that's 25 more hours of data review because we have to do 5 hours of review for each camera. And then we do 5 audio recorders. So that's another 25 hours of audio review. So we're up to 55 hours now between
Wow.
the 5-hour investigation, the 5 DVR cameras, and the 5 audio recorders. That doesn't include still photos. That doesn't include handheld camcorders. That doesn't include GoPros or trail cameras or, anything else, that the SLS systems that we have. We've got multiple SLS systems that we have at our disposal. So people really don't understand, they see it on TV and they're like, oh, wow, this looks really fun. And, but they don't realize, and if you pull an all-nighter, if you pull an 8-hour,
Yeah.
then you're looking at well over 100 hours of data review alone.
No kidding.
And so once we've combed through all of that meticulously, reliving that investigation over and over and over again, and comparing our tech center notes, because if we hear something, we call it into the tech center so that it can be logged. And, so that when we're going back over those cameras, we know that at 1942, which is, 7:42 for lay people, but we use military time, in the event that we have an investigation that takes more than 12 hours, that we know that at 1942, the A team heard a thud. And so we're looking at all of those cameras and paying close attention in 1942. Oh, well, camera B in this room had a book fall off the shelf at 1942. So now we've got, something that validates the thud that the investigating team heard. And we need to pay close attention to that video footage going, okay, what prompted that book to fall off the shelf?
Okay.
So, if we have to go back and rewatch and, and look, and so we're very meticulous when we go through our data. And then once we've got it all put together, we write a physical report, that talks
Yeah.
about, the weather conditions, the lunar phase, how many investigators were present, what the ambient temperature was throughout the structure or the area while we were there, the barometric pressure, we take all of those things into consideration. How many cameras were used? We log for the client how many hours we spent for free on their case.
Is that right?
Yes, we log all of that for the client. And then if we obtain video footage or audio footage or, something compelling that we can bring to the client, then it used to go on a CD, now it goes on a flash drive, and that goes to the client also. And again, we do this out of our pockets. We don't accept money for this. We're not in this for fame and fortune. We're in it for the research and for, I suppose you would say, the goodwill, of helping people.
Absolutely.
If we can help people feel more comfortable in their personal space, then our jobs are done.
Outstanding. Yeah, I like that. When you were talking about, obviously there's a lot of setup that goes through this. I can only imagine all of the devices and everything you have at your disposal. But I am curious. So we talked about you have numerous cameras, you have recorders. What are some of the unique devices that you have that maybe an average person wouldn't understand? I know you had been talking about, or I think I've seen on some of the TV shows, again, probably a lot of BS, but just to get it out there, what do they call it? A voice box or whatever. You hear the static and that's where you're trying to hear the ghost. Do you have something like that?
Yeah, we have a couple of them actually.
Okay.
And we use them. There's a town, it's called Newcastle, Colorado. And radio there, because of its location in the mountains, you can't get a radio signal there. And we get called there a lot actually, because there's geomagnetic instability there. The Colorado River runs right through it. There's underground mines. There's all kinds of things that can amplify those energies. We get called to that town a lot. And so in a town where there's no stray radio signals, you can use a spirit box or a Frank's box or one of those devices that scrolls through the radio frequencies. And one night we were investigating an apartment and, it's like, hi, this is who I am. We don't mean you any harm. We just want to talk. And we actually got a hello back through that device.
Really?
And it's like, okay, there are no, and we'll let it sweep through several times just to make sure that we're not getting any stray radio stations.
Okay.
And if we do, we'll know what frequency, we're picking up so that if we get something, it's like, okay, that was on 98.1 and we don't have any radios, that we're knowingly picking up until, 100.7. So we can jot that down. Obviously we try to validate it with other pieces of data. We try to validate it with just straight EVP. If we can get the same voice on an EVP without the use of a spirit box, great. If we can get it, get that in conjunction with perhaps some SLS footage, some SLS interaction, great.
And when you say SLS, what is SLS?
Okay, so I'm going to have to Google SLS so I don't butcher this. It's SLS.
Just from my understanding, to make sure that I understand exactly what you're using there.
Yeah, it's not the Space Launch System. It's because I butcher this every time. Structured Light Sensor.
Okay.
And so it operates on with the same technology as like the Xbox Kinect that detects your body and detects your movements, so you can play games without controllers.
Sure.
And so what this device, it scans the room and there's a tablet on there that gives us not only an infrared view of the room as we're scanning it, but it also gives us that SLS view of the room. And can detect anomalies, and it will give us a stick figure shape, and
No kidding.
yeah, and so we've had instances, where we see that stick figure and we wave at it, and sometimes they'll wave back.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So, uh, is there a way that maybe it can also be deceived as well? Have you run into experience
Yes.
where it gives like a false
Yes.
positive? Okay.
Yes. Especially the older ones are very prone. Like if you've got a floor lamp,
Mhm.
the older ones, they will easily pick up a floor lamp as a humanoid stick figure. I had one pick up a bollard pole. We investigated a car dealership, and there were bollard poles in the maintenance shop
Mhm.
of this car dealership, and and it was applying a stick figure to a bollard pole, and I'm like, I know for a fact that no.
That ain't it.
Uh, yeah. So, there's a lot of scrutiny, especially with the older technology. The newer ones that are coming out are better quality, and they're more thorough, and they're not as prone to technological pareidolia, to make something up. They're not as prone to error as the older models.
Very interesting.
Mhm.
Okay. So when you go into a house, and again, you have these devices with you,
Mhm.
am I understanding that obviously you have, depending on the size of the house, you have different teams.
Mhm.
You maybe team A will go to a room, they'll set up the SLS, they'll set up the recorders, and then it is just a bunch of trying to communicate with it, asking questions and trying to get a response, and then moving on to different rooms and just
Mhm.
trying to bait it out.
Yeah, absolutely. If we've got a 3-story house, we'll send team A down to the basement and team B up to the top floor, for a couple of reasons. Number one, to cover more ground, but also to keep from having inadvertent interference.
Mhm.
Because you don't want an investigating team's voices being misinterpreted as EVP on another team's audio recorders. Um, And then we also communicate with the tech center. We carry two-way radios and say, hey, tech center, we're going to the master bedroom. Tech center, show B team going to the garage. And so that way, not only is our command center aware of where the investigators are, so that in the event somebody gets into trouble for some reason, they know where to send help, but also to avoid inadvertent interference. And then the teams can switch places. Then A team can go to the basement and B team can go to the attic and see if experiences, activity, data, see if it can be replicated.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you guys are very scientific about it. I have to be honest. I mean, I think I fell in with the crowd. You go in with a camera, you ask a few questions, you get something back, and that's it. And it sounds much more scientific from your end, and so I'm very happy that you're doing that.
Yeah, it's been my passion for 20 years now to do this as scientifically as possible, and I've had naysayers. I've had some really big names in the field saying, can't be done, can't be done, can't be done. There's too many variables, and our investigations are not conducted in a lab. And, so the whole thing about doing it in a lab, I threw that right out the window, because when you look at research fields like archaeology, paleontology, biology, zoology, they conduct their experiments in the field and then take them back to the lab for analysis.
Yeah.
And that's what we do. You know, I mean, our lab is not necessarily, a clean room. Our lab can be somebody's dining room table, or oftentimes in my case, my bed, where I'm sitting there with my laptop and my headphones and with tears running down my eyes because, I've been watching the same video footage for 25 hours.
Sure.
Um, and, so that first argument, throw it right out, you know, lab not necessary. And then secondly, the whole issue of controls and variables. you can implement controls and eliminate variables when you are investigating. One of the things that you have control over is your equipment. If you're using the same device or a series of devices over and over and over again, and you're getting the same results, then you're getting data that can be validated.
Sure.
And if you're going to the same location and using the same instruments, again, that's another control. Time, temperature, lunar phase, weather conditions. Those are all controls, even though, weather conditions are a variable. But if you got really good results at the library during a thunderstorm, you can go back to that library during the next thunderstorm and see if you can replicate your data. Or
Interesting.
if you got really good results in the library during a full moon, you can go back on the next full moon. Or if you got really good, and I keep using the library as an example just because it's a public place, and
Sure.
some libraries are kind of creepy. I'm a bibliophile. I love libraries, but you get this, you get good results at the library during the months of July, August, and September, which are the 3 warmest months of the year. So then, and on a full moon, during a thunderstorm. So then you go back in July, August, and September during the full moon. And if you got a thunderstorm, there's another control, but you're using the exact same equipment. There's so many ways to control your experience to try to get that replicable and validated data.
So is it laziness on the people who were critiquing what you're having to say? They just didn't want to try to control it. They wanted to just more, kind of slapdash go and do it? Or how do they disagree? Because everything you're saying makes 100% sense. And if they are reputable in the field, I would understand that they would probably feel the same way. So what is the discrepancy between the two feelings?
Well, this is still such a very new field, believe it or not. And so there are no set methods. There's, we've got methods that are tried and true, and we've got old school and new school. We've got the compass, and we've got the EMF meter, and we've got, and then we've got the tri-field EMF meter, and we've got the K2, and then we've got the cell sensor, and then we've got the Mel meter. And, so the technology is evolving as we're learning more, and as we're gaining more experience and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And so oftentimes, and I wrote about this in my book, Debunking Common Paranormal Myths, Exploring Psychosomatic Pareidolia. Oftentimes investigators, especially investigators that are brand new to the field and have not been doing this for 20 plus years like I have, they are so hungry to get something that everything they encounter, everything they experience, they perceive to be paranormal in nature. Every sound, every smell, every gust of wind. Oh my gosh, it's a ghost. And do not get me started on dust orbs.
I was going to ask you about that. I've seen your merch on your website. What is it? It says it's just an orb.
Trust me, it's dust.
Yeah.
Trust me, it's dust.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's actually a really great article on the website that I wrote called The Great Orb Debate. That answers a lot of the arguments about those orbs. People going, oh, well, the orb that I saw was green or orange or red, or, and I mean, all of those really popular arguments in favor of dust orbs.
And can I just ask, are these, I think I actually read that article. I seem to recall in the article you said that what we're talking about, these dust orbs, that's when you don't see it with the naked eye, but you see it with a camera. Is that right? So what about if you see some sort of orb with the naked eye?
So if you see it with the naked eye, that lends a little more credibility to it. However, you need to make sure that you're ruling out things like ball lightning or swamp gas
What is ball lightning?
So ball lightning, it's actually it's an electrical phenomenon where there's, instead of like a lightning strike like we're accustomed to seeing, it's actually a ball of electricity that just appears because the conditions allow for it. There's just enough moisture and electricity in the air that this little spark, this little ball of electricity is able to manifest until it burns itself out. It usually only lasts a few seconds, and sometimes it flies around, and sometimes it just hovers. Lightning bugs. If or again, swamp gas can be a visible. But again, ball lightning and swamp gas are and lightning bugs. They're all more common in outdoor locations. So if you're in an indoor location, minus the ball lightning I saw in an indoor swimming pool once, but if you're in an indoor location and you see something with the naked eye, then you should probably be working really hard to try to film it or photograph it.
Well, so there's a reason I ask. And I usually, I don't tell many people this because I'm sure you understand there can be a stigma when it comes to this topic, right? And people start to look at you kind of funny. But that being said, this is the perfect venue since I have you on, and I'd love to get your opinion on something. Sure. So my house, I got to tell you, prior to living here, I've lived here for about 10 years. No real experiences or anything like that. Moving in day one, it's amazing. Stuff happened all the time. But what was really interesting to me is it ebbed and flowed. So I would have like a week of unbelievable knocks and pounds and things falling over and stuff like that. And then it would be dormant for like 6 months. And then before I know it, 2 weeks is going on and it's doing a bunch of stuff. And I got to tell you, I've never felt that it was in any way, well, for the most part, I'd never felt really scared or anything. It seemed like it was more of like a prankster, it was kind of messing around with me, but not in any sort of scary way. There was a 3-week period where I don't know what it was, but I can get to that story in a minute. The reason I was going to ask you about the orbs with the naked eye. So I had an experience in August, just this past August. Mm-hmm. I left my house and I went to Washington State to visit a buddy of mine.
Okay.
I was gone for 5 days. Now, when I left, everything was off. Okay. And I'm a little OCD about stuff like that. So, of course, I made sure multiple times everything was off in the house. I go and I leave. When I come back, I flew into DIA maybe around 10 p.m. I get down to my house maybe about 11:30 at night. Okay. And so it wasn't too late. And I open up my front door, and right in front of me is the podcast room. And you may see it behind me, but there's a light behind this plant back here. Mm-hmm. And I have 2 of them. So I have 2 plants. I have 2 lights. And they were the only things on in the house. They were a red color. Okay. And I didn't find this out until later, but just to throw it out there, I thought it was just, I have electrical issues in my house, mm-hmm. just, one of those houses that has those things. And so I thought that maybe it was just a surge, the lights turned on, except it turns out that when that happens, because I've seen it happen, it goes into the rainbow setting. That's its base degree, not the red. And in fact, I did some tests, and you have to click multiple times to get it to red, mm-hmm. plus times 2 in 2 different sockets, right? And so that was very concerning. Now, as a police officer, or a former police officer, I thought someone was in my house. I didn't even think it was a ghost. I thought that someone was in there actually waiting for me, and that's a very big concern for cops. But my gun was upstairs because I had just gotten back from the airport. So I walk in the door, I go over and I turn on the light to my hallway, and right when I turn on the light, I hear a bang right on my washing machine, which is upstairs. And I said, I've got an intruder. And so I grab a knife, I start walking upstairs and making my way to the room with the washing machine, and I flip on the light, and right when I do it, I see this, an orb, a wisp, whatever. It was very fast, and it was lit up by itself. It wasn't reflective. It was self-lit, and it flew. It went right around the corner. And that was I mean, I didn't know what it was. Clearly, it wasn't a bug. I mean, it
Right.
wasn't. I highly doubt it was ball lightning or swamp gas in Colorado Springs.
Right.
So anyway, I cleared the rest of my house. I didn't see any intruder. I come back downstairs. By this time, there is lights all over my house that are on because I'm trying to see if there's anyone in the house with me,
Right.
with the exception of the podcasting room, the studio. I never touched it. The lights were still red. And I walked over in front of it and I was just standing there looking at it. And I was trying in my head, kind of like you with that figure when you were in the Air Force.
Mhm.
I was just trying to say, okay, how did these turn on? What am I seeing here? You know what I mean? And so I stand there and I actually asked, I said, what the hell happened? And right when I said that, the lights started going into a flashing mode and they started changing the colors. And I didn't really know how to process that at the time. And so I kind of left it as it was. I walked away, I went upstairs, and then finally later on that evening I came down and I just turned everything off and was like, I'm not dealing with this. But I'm the orb that I'm talking to you about, again, it was a 4-year veteran Marine, 12 years on the police department, and I've seen a lot of strange things. I've never seen anything like that. So what is your opinion on something like that?
So I'm gonna ask you a few questions.
Sure.
So, first question: was there anybody that had access to your house that was caring for your plants
No.
while you were gone? No. Okay. So nobody had a key or
I
okay.
live alone. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but like I said, I didn't know if maybe you had a neighbor or somebody that had, come watered your plants and flushed the toilets and all that.
Sure.
Okay. Second question, what shoes were you wearing at the time?
I was wearing cowboy boots.
Cowboy boots. Okay. And were you on carpet, tile, linoleum, hardwood?
Well, I have a mix of both through the house.
When
Most
you
of it's
saw the
carpet.
orb, when you saw the orb, what were you walking on?
When I saw the orb, I was standing on carpet. In the washing or the room with the washing machine, it's like a tile in there, but I never set foot in there.
You never set foot in there. Okay. So there's a method to my madness, obviously,
Yeah.
because the investigator in me is going, oh wow, this is really cool. He had a potentially paranormal encounter, but the scientist in me is going, okay, number one, is it possible that somebody else had a remote or something that could have, that they could have been, clicking, messing with your lights, knowing that you were home, messing with your lights, and then also. The thought process was, could it have been a static electricity discharge that you saw? Because when you inadvertently, especially in the dark, when you have a static discharge, when you touch a light switch or something and you zap your finger, sometimes you can see that. And a big enough static discharge, especially in an area that has been dormant and has not had airflow or people walking through it, when that electricity builds up, and then you have a sudden discharge, much like a lightning strike, you can have a visible discharge. From the sound of it, I mean, cowboy boots, not the best for grounding, but not the worst. And and the bang on the washer, hard to say. How old is your house?
22 years. It was built in
22 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a lot of settling going on with it?
I mean, no, not really.
No. Is it possible that when you opened the door after having it sealed up for so long, is it possible that the pressure change caused the metal in the washing machine to expand or contract to cause your bang?
I don't think so. That
I mean,
I'm
I'm not
talking about
trying to
bang.
discredit you. I'm just trying to say,
No.
these are the, this is the thought process that we go through, when we're trying to ascertain, you have to factor out the possible before you can factor in the, the potential.
Oh, I'm
And
loving it, by the way. I'm
oh,
actually glad that you're
I'm
challenging it.
glad.
Yeah.
Instead of me going, oh yeah, you got a ghost in your house is haunted. I need to come and investigate this. I need to go check it out. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things again, I'm gonna level with you
Hmm.
that I think being a cop, I don't know how many times you've actually encountered police officers that have had experiences, uh, but at least here in Colorado Springs, the directive is that we go on they call it a death of undetermined origin. It could be a
Hmm.
gunshot. We know
Yeah.
that the person was shot, but it's still counted as that until homicide takes a look and they see that it's a homicide or, a suicide or whatever.
Hmm.
But no matter what, we're on death calls multiple times a week, some of them extremely, extremely violent. And I think that, you never know what you're picking up with you, what follows you home. And so I have had a lot of interesting encounters where I try to disprove it. The one that I was mentioning before, where I felt that this was the only time where I actually felt scared, if I'm being honest,
Hmm.
was I don't even know what event or anything triggered it. But one night I laid down in the house by myself and I turn off all the lights. I'm going to bed. I was just, nothing was on, right?
Hmm.
And I lay in my bed and I start to fall asleep. I start to drift out. And then I hear three loud thuds, bangs on my floor. And I thought someone was sprinting at me, is what it sounded like. And I woke up and I grabbed my gun. And again, I mean, I hate to say it, but I thought someone was in my house. I thought that someone was trying to attack me. They were waiting until I was there. So I'm looking around again. I'm sure you're going to think I'm neurotic, going through each room and trying to clear it out. Well, what was interesting, found nothing. And so then I said, okay, you were just in that phase where you're like half in, half out. It was probably a dream. Just go back to sleep. Well, so it started becoming a regular thing. Multiple times a night, I would get woken up, and it's again always three thuds coming at me, and it was loud. And it's a carpeted room, by the way. So I mean, the fact that it's banging, that's something. And it lasted for approximately 3 weeks. Now, what I did notice about myself during that time, because I was checking everything, I was trying to figure out what it was. At one point in time, I thought maybe it's some sort of plumbing issue between the two floors because it's on a top floor. Maybe
Right.
there's some sort of clog or something. And I couldn't debunk it. I couldn't find what was causing it. But I found myself starting to get very desensitized to it because nothing else was happening. It was just these three loud bangs. And so finally, it got to the point where I didn't react to it. I was tired. I'm like, what the hell ever, man. Drag me off the bed if you want to scare me, but if you're not going to do that, I don't even care. And then it stopped.
Okay.
And so, yeah, but that was something that affected me, and I have no clue what it was, and it hasn't happened again since. So,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
And sometimes if there is a spectral entity that is trying to really get your attention and you're not paying attention to it, eventually it will give up
Yeah.
and it will go away. And that's one thing that we tell our clients, especially the ones that don't want to peacefully coexist. We tell them, do not watch ghost hunting programs, do not watch horror movies, do not talk about what's going on, do not talk to it, do not get angry at it and say, you have to leave my house, ignore it. It's going to take a while, but eventually it will get frustrated and it will stop. But if you keep talking about it and bringing it up and everything, that's going to feed it because they know they're getting your attention.
Hmm.
It's like a toddler. You know,
Sure.
I know I'm getting your attention. I'm gonna push your buttons until you pay attention to me.
Yeah.
Um, so in that aspect, um, you know, ignoring it, yeah. And there in the book that I wrote, the Phantom Hitchhiker Project in America's Haunted Roadways, you know, talking about some of those traumatic scenes
Mhm.
where a death was so sudden or so violent, that a potential energy imprint has been left either on the ground or in the building or what have you. It's actually not an uncommon thing for there to be paranormal activity resulting from that. Just because um, it's like when you're driving down the road, uh, in the car, and you've got your seatbelt on. That seatbelt is holding you inside the car.
Mhm.
Uh, but when something happens and you are so forcefully, the spirit is so forcefully expelled from your body, for lack of a, yeah, just to be blunt,
Sure.
the spirit is so forcefully expelled from your body, that can leave, any consciousness that remains, that can leave a lot of confusion.
Mhm.
And so for there to be, um, something that, maybe attaches, if you showed compassion to that recently departed person, they may be like, okay, this guy feels for me, he's paying attention to me and everything. And so they're gonna hang out, until there's like, okay, well, I'm not getting anywhere with this guy. I'm out.
Sure.
I'm on bounce. Um, whereas others don't necessarily attach themselves to a person, but they are attached to the land, like a tire track in the mud. The car is long gone, but the track remains. Or even the vehicle itself. I had a police officer call me back in '05, I think it was '05. They had a vehicle in impound that had been it had been wrecked, and
Okay.
there was a fatality, and it had been auctioned off. The vehicle was repaired, put back on the road, and then there was another fatality. I think it was a shooting. Somebody shot the driver through the window, and it ended up back in impound, and it was auctioned off. It was cleaned up, auctioned off. The window was repaired, and when the third fatality happened, this police officer called me and said, "Hey, this is the third time that I've had this vehicle in my impound, in the same impound,
Really?
due to a fatality." And I told her, scrap it.
Yeah.
Don't auction it. Scrap it.
Yeah.
And he did. He sent it to the scrapyard. Um, because, he was tired of seeing. I couldn't conclusively prove that the vehicle was haunted, but I couldn't prove that it wasn't.
Sure. Well, that's a heck of a coincidence, quote unquote.
Right.
If you're
Right.
having three fatalities in one single vehicle at three separate occasions, I mean,
Yeah.
that would raise anyone's eyebrows.
Yeah. It was a white Honda Civic. And, and they kept, and Hondas have a pretty good resale value. So they kept, you know, they'd auction it off and it would get repaired or restored or what, cleaned up.
Sure.
And then there'd be another fatality in it. So after the third one, this police officer, he was the sergeant for this very small town police department. He says, "What do I do?" Scrap the car.
No kidding.
And they did.
Do you find, I mean, do you have a lot of like paranormal, or I'm sorry, police officers, if you can disclose this, contact you when they've run into something like that? I mean, is that a pretty regular occurrence?
Yeah. We do actually. We've got several police chiefs who know that we are around and we're available. And if they've got a citizen that is constantly calling them about, stuff that they just can't figure out, you know,
Sure.
they'll say, here, call this organization. They'll give them our card. Um, and we actually did a law enforcement blitz several years ago where I drafted a letter to every single um, municipality and sheriff's department within I think it was like a 250-mile radius. So we covered most of the western slope
Uh-huh.
and said, hey, we're here, we're free, we're science based, we're confidential. If you've got something going on that you cannot understand, don't hesitate to call us. And there have been some agencies that have taken us up on that. And they're like, hey, and we actually got a phone call from a police from an on-duty police officer, and he says, I don't know if you know, but there's an exorcism going on in my town. Like, what are you talking? And he got called out to a noise complaint.
Really?
And yeah, he got called out to a noise complaint, and he goes and knocks on the door, and this priest who is lathered in sweat answers the door. And there's two other priests, restraining a person on the living room floor with a sheet, with a bed sheet. They've got this person, held down safely, restrained with a bed sheet. And this cop calls me. He says, I'm not sure, but there's an exorcism going on. I'm like, oh yeah, we called them. and he's like, oh, okay. He goes, well, I told him keep it down. I said, good luck with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's, they know that we're around, and they're pretty comfortable. Some of them are pretty comfortable in calling us. There's others that are like, no way.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I mean, like I said, just as a police officer, I'm sure some of them think it's taboo, especially if you have an agency that maybe their police chief doesn't believe in something like that. Then the minute you start suggesting it, they say, oh man, I got to get this guy a psych eval, maybe he shouldn't even be on the street. So a lot of that probably gets kind of swept under the rug, which is unfortunate. So you brought up exorcism, and so I want to leap over to another topic. Sure. Demons, right? So we talked about the different things so far up to this point. We've really been kind of leaning into maybe ghosts or something of that nature. Do you have any experiences? I know you mentioned, I think you said 2.
Unfortunately, yes.
So tell me about that. I mean, how do you differentiate, and then just the experience you had? I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So there's certain criteria. And, safety is paramount within my organization. If it sounds like a demon and smells like a demon, I'm going to call it a demon, and I'm going to call the investigation immediately and get my team out of that location as quickly and safely as possible. We've got protocol for handling situations like that, where even if the situation calls for it, we won't even collect our gear or our equipment. We've got thousands of dollars worth of equipment. We won't even collect our equipment until it's safe to do so.
No kidding.
If I suspect demonic activity, and we also have an ordained minister on our team.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and he and I have worked together on a demonic case. And again, there are certain criteria. When you first said you were hearing a sequence of 3, with the 3 footsteps or the 3 bangs or whatever, I immediately got a red flag, because knocking or banging in sequence of 3 is one of the markers for demonic activity, because it's a mocking of the Holy Trinity.
You're kidding me.
No.
Oh, that makes me feel uneasy.
You said it went away, and you didn't go on to elaborate, about oppression or depression or changes in your moods or thought processes or anything like that. So I'm pretty comfortable that, that it was leaving you alone, that it didn't get its hooks in you, and I don't need to call, an exorcist to come take care of you.
Sure.
But
3s though, so that's a regular thing where it knocks and bangs and everything.
In sequence of 3, it's a mocking of the Holy Trinity.
Wow.
Yeah. Also growling with no apparent source.
That sounds terrifying.
It's not pleasant. And then the smell, rotting eggs, rotting meat, just death.
So like a sulfur type.
Yep. Sulfuric, rotten. Just thinking about it, I want to throw up.
Sure.
It's bad. Oh, once you smell it, you never forget it.
No kidding.
Yeah. And I've had 3 cases in my career. So contrary to what you see on television, demonic encounters are not as popular as TV would have you believe.
Okay.
And,
And you say not as popular, like not as prevalent, like they don't happen very often, or they're just not
right,
talked about as much? Okay.
right. They're not as prevalent. But I personally have encountered three.
Really?
And, yeah, and it's once you encounter one, you don't ever wanna do it again, but boy, how do you know what to look for?
Hmm.
And so, and you have to be aware, if you've got knocking and banging in sequence of 3, and then all of a sudden you're getting a child's voice on an EVP, you need to pay attention because you've already got one key warning sign, and now you've got an EVP knowing that demonic entities will try to trick you. They will try to deceive you. And especially with women, they will try to portray themselves as children trying to gain that trust so that they can get access to you.
Sure.
Uh, so, you've got to be really careful. You've got to scrutinize everything and always have that level of caution in the back of your head. You're when you walked into your house and you heard that bang and saw the lights on in your house, your first instinct was to get your gun.
Hmm.
Um, and well, you grabbed a knife, obviously, because it was closer. But to investigate. So my first instinct, in hearing things, if I've got a growl out of nowhere, there are no animals in this house. Nobody had Taco Bell for dinner. No, there is no apparent source for this noise. I'm going to start looking for the other signs.
Hmm.
My olfactory senses are going to be on hyper alert. I'm going to be listening for anything in sequence of 3. I'm going to be, go doing blast EVP sessions. I'm going to be playing that audio back on site, listening, listening for a voice or, something mimicking a child or something of that nature. And I'm going to be looking to see if I can see it. Only once have I ever personally seen one. 3 of us saw it. It's like, I will, oh, nope.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually saw one with my own eyes. I will never forget it as long as I live. It's
Is it, is that something you can describe to us?
um yes and no.
Okay.
Um I it was there was a baby's changing table. So if you're familiar with baby changing tables, there's usually a shelf on the bottom, where you store, like the diapers and the wipes and stuff, and then there's the top part that is the changing table itself.
Yeah.
And so what we saw was this black shadow with very long fingers crawling upside down on the underneath side of that baby changing table.
Really?
Yeah. And we already had the growling and the knocking in the sequence of 3. The only thing we didn't have was the smell. And as soon as I saw it, I called the investigation.
Yeah,
I
no
said,
doubt.
I told the 2 people that witnessed it with me and that were with me, I said, get up and go back to tech center. We're going now. Walk, do not run.
Mhm.
You know, we're we're out. We're done. And I radioed tech center, gave them the code word, and said, pack it up. We're out.
Yeah.
And we ended up having to call an exorcist out of Texas to take care of that location. And it got a lot worse before it got better. But because we were able to identify it early enough, not only was I able to keep my team safe, but we were able to get that family help sooner rather than later.
So what is your concern with demons? Because you're the way you're portraying it to me. I mean, we're talking about a really serious safety factor,
Mhm.
and so is the concern some sort of like violent encounter? Is the concern like what could potentially happen with an
So
entity like that?
so it could the dangers are physical, they're mental, they're emotional, they're social. Um, there are so many dangers when you're dealing with a malevolent entity like that. Um, if you talk to the priest, they're after your soul. If you talk to a layperson, they're after your life. Um,
Really?
when you get you have the initial encounter, and then you have the signs and symptoms of the infestation. The depression, the oppression, um, and which ultimately results in possession. Um, and you know, and people die.
Sure.
People have died, either at their own hands or as a result of whatever illness stems from um, having this entity attached to them for so long. And the longer it's there, the deeper it hooks it. It's like a tapeworm, the longer it's there, the more damage it does.
Okay.
And yeah,
So why not? You said walk, don't run, and you were very specific. So why not run? Just out of curiosity.
it's a safety thing. Um,
Like tripping on.
yeah, like tripping, it's the same, if you're in a fire, you walk, don't run. Um, you know, y- and it's a safety thing. It's also a professional thing. You don't want the clients to see you bolting out of there like Ghostbusters running out of the library.
Sure.
Um, you know, um, and you don't want to provoke whatever it is that's in there with you.
Okay. So it could provoke almost like a dog, how if you
Mhm.
run away from it, it will chase you. And you're saying the same
Possibly,
thing can happen with the demon.
possibly, yeah,
Yeah.
possibly, yeah.
When with any of those experiences that you've had, so you've had three, um, and you pack up and you walk out, have you or any of your crew experienced some sort of attachment? You were saying if it attaches, have you ever experienced something after the fact, after you pulled out, like maybe the demon picked one of you and attached itself?
I have not, but one of my investigators has. And that's one of the reasons that we keep clergy on the team,
Okay.
to not only um, act as ministerial counsel, a counselor for the clients, um, but also to intercede in the event of, exposure.
Hmm.
It's like having having a medic on board a ship, somebody that can intercede quickly in the event of exposure to something nasty. And so, having clergy on board, we did have an investigator who actually, had physical signs on their body.
Really? Like
Welt.
what?
Uh, they had um, welt patterns on their legs, symbols, welts that just appeared before our eyes, and they were already showing behavioral changes. And it
Okay.
had been about a week since we had investigated. Um, and it wasn't one of the cases where I pulled the team because I didn't suspect anything. So I'm not sure how or when or where they had encountered, but the family noticed behavioral changes. They called us in, and we're watching these patterns just appear on their legs. And, of course, we're asking the medical questions. Did you eat anything you weren't supposed to? Have you changed your laundry detergent? Have you, you know, were you outside pulling weeds? What could possibly be causing these bright red raised welts that were in patterns? They were in identical patterns on both legs.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so it wasn't until, break out the holy water and start the prayers and everything that, things finally simmered down, and they're fine now.
Yeah.
Their behavior went back to normal, but this person was actually making passes at our resident clergyman
Oh, is that
last
right?
night. Go, oh yeah, yeah. I mean, they were, and he's going,
Yeah.
yeah, no, uh, uh, you know, the power of Christ compels you. I'm just, dousing them with the holy water and the holy oil and anointing them in the prayers, and we were able to get on top of it before we had to call an exorcist.
Do you guys do anything proactively? Meaning you pull yourself out of a house where you believe there's a demon, and do you do anything even before you see signs like we need to go talk to our clergyman?
Yeah, we actually, at the end of every investigation, we've got people from different faiths, in our organization. We've got Catholics, we've got Christians, we've got Wiccans,
Interesting.
and so everyone is essentially responsible for their own safety net based on their personal beliefs, because their personal beliefs and their internal power in their deity is going to be way stronger than anything I can implement.
Okay.
And so, when we wrap up an investigation, we take a timeout, and, and the Wiccan, does her little smudge thing, and, and the Catholics are, crossing themselves, and, and the Christians, saying prayers, and, people that believe in white light are, you know, envisioning that white light around them. Um, that has been very successful for us as far as maintaining our own personal safety and having, a proactive measure, when we leave the scene, so that anything that was there stays there and doesn't go home with us.
Absolutely. What have you guys ever done an investigation where there has been Satan worship?
Yes.
You have. Was
Yes.
that one of the areas where you encountered one of your demons?
Yes.
It
Yes.
was?
Yeah.
How did you know that it was Satan worship?
So we were called in by this elderly woman, and she happened to have custody of her older teenage grandson.
Okay.
And the first indicator was there was a framed copy of the Lord's Prayer hanging up in the kitchen. And we're doing our baseline EMF readings, just looking to see where we're going to get random hot spots and everything. And we kept getting really high readings on this Lord's Prayer, this framed copy of the Lord's Prayer.
Really?
And so I took it off the wall, and we're running the meter on the wall thinking that maybe there's electrical conduit that isn't properly insulated or something, in the walls. Nope. And we set this Lord's Prayer on the kitchen table, and we're running the meters over it, and it's lighting up like a Christmas tree. And so
Yes.
I took it apart. I took it out of the frame, going, is it maybe a lighted frame or something? What's going on with this? Is somebody playing a trick on us? Is there something inside this picture frame, meant to trip us up? Because we've had people do that too. And nothing. And you run that meter over that piece of paper with the Lord's Prayer, and that meter every time, upwards of, over 20 milligauss.
And is that quite a bit?
Yeah. Anything over 0.8 is considered physically hazardous. So prolonged exposure to anything over 0.8 can be physically dangerous.
Wow.
Prolonged exposure, temporary exposures, but if you're exposed to anything over 0.8, day after day for years, again, you're talking about the power lines of the city parks, that's, it can be dangerous.
Sure.
And so we're doing our investigation, and we go into this grandson's bedroom, and there is propaganda. There is Satanist propaganda, white supremacist propaganda. This kid was into some nasty stuff. You
Really?
could tell he was an angry young man.
Yeah.
And he had been in and out of trouble. Both of his parents were in jail. That's how grandma ended up with custody. And he was just a very, very, you could tell just by the stuff on his walls. He was a very angry young man. And so we closed the door to his bedroom. We're like, I think it's best if we just stay out of here. I was actually pushed down the stairs that night.
Really?
Yep.
Holy.
It felt like somebody took two hands and pushed me down the stairs. And I did a swan dive. It was very graceful.
Wow.
Yeah. Onto the landing.
Yeah.
And later that night, things started happening. We started getting the knocking and banging in sequence of 3, and we were in the living room, and all of our meters started going off, and the entire living room filled up with the rotting stench.
Is that right?
And we actually had, at the time, our lead clergy was a retired Dominican priest.
Okay.
And so I called the investigation. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, we're done. We're out. And we, before we packed everything up, and on the way out, Padre's blessing everybody, with the holy water, and, he's blessing everybody as they're walking out the door. And then he and I went through that house room by room. I think they had to call, like Mr. Back or something after we were done, because we hosed that apartment with holy water. I
No
mean, it
kidding.
was, it was drenched, and we hit that kid's room too. There was no screaming and no banging on the walls. I mean, there was nothing, that showed resistance.
Hmm.
But we made it abundantly clear that, number one, it was not going to attach itself to us. It was not going to follow us home. But it couldn't stay where it was.
Sure. Sure.
And we put grandma up in a hotel at our expense that night. And then the next day we took her out to breakfast and said, this is what happened. This is what we found. This is what we encountered. And grandma never went in the grandson's bedroom. She was always respecting his privacy and understanding, he'd been through a lot. Oh, and it's like, okay, grandma, you need to stop making exceptions for him, or, making excuses for him, and get him some help. And she followed up with us about a month later, and she actually had him in psychotherapy,
Okay.
and the activity was slowing down and stopping.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I had one time on the department where I actually ended up going into, I'm not an expert by any means, but just from what I could make out, it was a Satan worshiper.
Mm-hmm.
And what ended up happening was, when I was a newer police officer, and we get a call, there's a law in Colorado that if you are doing drugs, in this case it was heroin, and someone that you're with ends up ODing, if you call and you get medical, then you won't face any charges for
Right.
the drugs itself. And so apparently there were two people in this apartment. One ODs, the other one calls us and runs out of the apartment and leaves. So the apartment is cracked open. And so I'm the responding officer. No one has arrived yet. I open the door and see the body, and I go in, cleared out. Everyone's gone except for this right here. Do life-saving measures. But that being said, I believe the person probably waited a while before calling the cops. They were probably trying to decide, because unfortunately this person had passed before I even got there. We still got medical to come check him out, but he died right there. I get medical, I get another officer, I'm doing the death investigation, and we end up getting the coroner coming out. And I don't know why it took me so long, right? I'm so focused on the body and focused on if there's anything else around. At that point, once the coroner comes, essentially I'm just waiting for them to do what they have to do. And I happen to look up and I realize that there's a lot of stuff in here that's very concerning to me. One of which was like an altar, looked like it had a knife and some sort of animal skull on it, and a few other odds and ends. This is really weird. When I walk in the apartment, it's facing the bedroom. The door's wide open, and I don't know why. I mean, maybe you have an idea. Above the bed was a picture of the girl from the original Exorcist movie.
Linda
When
Blair.
she's possessed, but it was almost put in up there in like a ritualistic fashion. So it was her face, and it had basically like some sort of wreath of thorns or something around it, and it was up above the bed. And there was a few other odds and ends that was really concerning to me. Now, at the time, I said, okay, well, this guy is clearly a heroin addict. I mean, I'm sure that their head wasn't quite right, and I just kind of left it at that. But as soon as the coroner took the body and left, I have no other reason to be in the apartment. And by the way, the door had been open to the hallway this entire time. So I go to walk out and I start to close the door, and I happen to look behind the door, and there's a coat rack. And on the coat rack was, I think when I counted it, it was 16 pairs of handcuffs right next to the front door. And I said, at the moment, I said, I think I think this guy might be some sort of maybe a rapist or potential serial killer. I mean, what point does
Right.
this person need 16 pairs of handcuffs? And I look closer and I see at the time, I thought it might have been blood on the handcuffs. Stupid me. I had taken my gloves off. Police officers always use gloves, but I had
Right.
taken them off. And I had been in this apartment now probably, 2 hours. And I go and I grab one of the pairs of handcuffs to look at it. And it ended up being, I think it was like rust or something like that.
Okay.
Well, I put it back. I let our intelligence team know because I do want to know, if this is possibly related to something, everything out there. But in the time it took for me to walk from the apartment down the hallway, down like 10 steps, and then my police car is right out front, I step foot out the door. And at that point in time, I stopped and I ended up falling to my knees, and I felt it felt like the worst flu I had ever had. I mean, it hit me all like that just in one particular moment. And at the time, I'm not even lying to you. I thought I was going to have medical come and take me away. And I thought I had been exposed to something. But the odd thing was everyone else that was in the apartment was totally fine. And it didn't even hit me until that last moment when I grabbed those handcuffs and I walk out. So I ended up, everything ended up being okay. I was out sick for about 3 or 4 days.
Mhm.
And so it was a very uncomfortable experience, but that was probably the first time where I was like, okay, I believe that this was a Satan worshiper. It's no longer just some heroin addicts, fantasies or whatever. This was a real thing. So
Mhm.
have you ever experienced anything in one of your investigations, like the physical symptoms?
Um, not to that degree.
Okay.
Um, but from what you're describing, it certainly sounds like some sort of Satan worship or demon worship.
Yeah.
Um, and there there is a drastic difference between Satan worshipers and the Church of Satan. And any member of the Church of Satan will tell you there is a huge difference. And the Church of
Really?
Satan, yeah, the Church of Satan is actually more closer aligned to modern day Wicca, where it's not about the devil. It's more about being in tune with the earth and the elements. But whereas Wiccans don't believe in heaven and hell, Church of Satan does. Um,
Sure. Okay.
and but then you have Satanists who actually w- straight up worship and try to call on uh or summon the devil. And then you've got the demon worshipers, um, who try to summon demonic entities. And those are the ones that get themselves in trouble. And the drugs obviously fuel some of that and some of that desire, because clearly if they're trying to summon a demon, they're searching for something in their life.
Hmm.
If they're and by doing drugs, especially heroin,
Yeah.
they're needing something, something psychological. They're searching for something, whether it's happiness or fulfillment or attention or who knows. Um, and so from what you're describing, it sounds like to me, like they definitely encountered something nasty. They probably did make contact with somebody. Um, and unfortunately, between the drugs and their inability to fight off whatever entity they may have been interacting with, if that was the case. Um, but from what you're describing, it sounds to me like maybe you got a little too close to the truth.
Hmm.
And, and that was it sounds to me like it was a warning, like, hey, you you put your nose where it shouldn't have been.
Sure. Yeah, that's very interesting. I don't know. I mean, I suppose we'll never know. That's more than 10 years ago now.
Right. Oh,
But it was quite the shock, especially to a rookie cop that, you think that you're going to go out and do good every day. And then before you know it, you're encountering something like this that you were never prepared for.
yeah.
And so it is nice to hear that an organization like yours is open to, at least discuss it. I don't know if they have anything like that out here, but I'll have to look into it.
There are organizations all over the state.
Yeah.
Some are more reputable than others.
Sure.
Some are more thorough than others. Some are fly-by-nights. They see things on TV and they're like, oh yeah, I want to do this. And then they realize how much work it is and they're like, no, or how expensive it is. And no, or they're like, yeah, we'll come check out your place, but you're going to pay us to do it. And
Okay.
no.
Sure.
Any organization that's worth their salt will not charge you a penny for it. Because the minute you start charging people, for a service, they're going to expect a result.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, we go into a location and we're like, yeah, we got nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I can't in good conscience take somebody's money and turn around and say, yeah, I got nothing, but thanks for the paycheck.
Yeah.
And so, do your research. If they've got letters of recommendation, they're probably a reputable organization. Along with our investigation report that we send to the client, we send them a customer survey with a self-addressed stamped envelope for them to fill out, going, how'd we do?
No kidding.
Yeah.
That
Did we help you? Were your questions answered? How professional did you find the team? How knowledgeable did you find the team? Things like that. What are we doing right? And, where do we need a course correction or, where do we need more training maybe?
sure.
And things of that nature. Did we value your privacy? Did we value your confidentiality? We send that survey,
That's amazing.
to our clients.
And you get a lot of good feedback from it?
We do. We
Yeah.
get a lot of good feedback from it. And the one thing I would really like to convey, our website clearly says in bright red letters, we serve Western Colorado and Eastern Utah.
Mhm.
And especially this time of year, it's just not feasible for us to travel to the Front Range. And we get calls all the time for the Front Range and the Springs. And I had a guy, I had to send him a pretty strongly worded email last Friday because he was from Boulder and he's
Oh,
sending
really?
us repeated requests for service. And, and I told him, I emailed him. I'm like, look, we've received your requests, but you are outside of our service area. Please find somebody local. And if you can't, let us know. And, we can potentially refer you to, to somebody over there. But you'd be surprised at how many people don't know Western Colorado from the Front Range.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. It's like we serve Western Colorado and Eastern Utah. Now, that's not to say we can't or haven't or won't travel.
Mhm.
If we've got a case, we put priorities on cases with children.
Okay.
We dropped everything and traveled to Colorado Springs in the middle of the week to help a lady with a developmentally disabled little girl. This lady was at her wit's end. It was starting to impact her daughter. It was impacting their quality of life. We dropped everything and traveled to Colorado Springs in the middle of the week to help this family.
Really?
So that's not to say that we haven't, we can't, or we won't. It's just not feasible all the time for us to travel like that, especially since we do this out of our own pockets. So, we like to stay, as close to home as we can. But if circumstances call for it, if it's an emergency situation, we will travel. Or if it's in the summertime and we're feeling like a field trip, we're like, hey, we got this case out of Colorado Springs. Do we want to take it or do we want to defer it to one of the others? And, oh yeah, let's take it. Or, hey, we got this case in Lyman, or we got this case in Boulder or Greeley or,
Yeah.
and, Evergreen. We worked a case in Evergreen last year. So, it's not to say that we haven't, we can't, or we won't. We just, look for something local before you call us because
Yeah.
we'll probably have to turn you down.
Well, I got to tell you, I can confirm to you that it is in big red letters on your website because that was one of the first things that I read, and that's why I made sure at the beginning of this episode that I said Western Colorado. You guys were very clear on that, and so that's unfortunate that that I mean, I know a lot of people may be in they feel they're in crisis, if it's a everyday thing. But at the same time, you are right in the fact that if they're all over the state, as you say, and I have no doubt that there are, that it's just probably time they move on to someone that's a little bit more closer to them. So I tell you what, I know we're running a little bit long here. I've just got 2 other questions, and then I'll let you go for the night.
Sure.
All right. So the last fan question that I have, so this is going to be from Sue A.
Hi, Sue.
And she says, what would you say to someone who doubts the validity of paranormal investigations?
So there are still people who believe that man never walked on the moon or that the earth is flat
Sure.
or, there's always going to be naysayers.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be naysayers. And so, to the people that say, paranormal investigation is bunk, it's like, you do you.
Sure.
I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing for more than half my life. And, you do your thing, I'll do mine, and I'll be here when you need me.
Yeah. They're naysayers until they become an experiencer, right?
Exactly.
Until something happens and then they're like, oh, okay, this changes my mind.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very good response. I like that. All right. So the last question, and this will end it on a little bit more of a lighter note, but I am genuinely curious. Ouija boards. So it's funny because in my mind, I think of it, I think I did some research on one. They said it was just like a parlor trick from the 1800s or whatever. Someone was going around and kind of conning people out of money. But then when you actually, start looking up articles and things about it in current day, they're like, do not, and close your Ouija board. If you've used it, you got to go to the close thing or whatever. What is your opinion on Ouija boards?
Yeah, no, I do not advocate the use of Ouija boards, talking boards, any of those spirit communication devices that require your participation.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes for dowsing rods, pendulums, all of that. Anytime where you are inviting something unknown or unseen to physically touch you or use your energy, you are potentially asking for trouble. Because you don't know for sure who or what you are dealing with.
Yeah.
And, and we've been called into situations, where, oh, it's just a harmless game. It's just a parlor trick. And, and then all of a sudden, they've got, a 15-pound obsidian sphere go flying off their countertop and, leaving a great big dent in their linoleum floor. And their 4-year-old is using phrases like, my imaginary friend wears comfortable shoes and her daddy hurt her in the bathroom.
Really?
We're getting, it's, so all of a sudden we're getting called in to clean up somebody else's mess because they either dismissed it or ignored the warnings. So, again, you do you. I'll be here when you need me. But I don't advocate the use of any of that.
That's really good to know. I think most people would agree with you, but for some reason, people still pick it up. And it's funny because I think Mattel owns Ouija. Like, I mean, this is something you could go to like Walmart and buy one, but yeah, that's pretty scary. Clarissa, I got to tell you, this has been amazing. Absolutely. I've always wanted to have a conversation with a paranormal investigator, again, with my experiences and just the things that I've encountered over the years as a police officer. And it is so wonderful to pick your brain. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you on behalf of me and my fans for taking the time, especially here. We're almost 9 p.m. and you're up talking with me. And so I really appreciate it. And the other thing that I want to say is I'm still very, very impressed by how scientific you and your organization, how you choose to go things and use the scientific method, and you're trying to collect all the data points. And so I'm really excited to see, what comes in this field in the future. It sounds like you're making some headway there. And so I'm going to keep a keen eye on it.
Yeah, we're certainly trying. I don't know if we'll be regarded as a legitimate form of scientific research in my lifetime,
Sure.
but we're on our way.
Outstanding. Well, I'm happy to hear it. Well, thank you again for joining us tonight. To my fans and viewers, I really appreciate your participation with these wonderful questions for Clarissa, and we will see you on the next one. So everyone, take care tonight. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Mugshot Podcast. Like and subscribe where you can, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.